Hi, Luke Hanson McDonald here. Welcome back to Beyond the Family Business Podcast. Today we have an interview with Rebecca Kacaba. She's the CEO and co-founder of DealMaker, one of the fastest growing businesses in Canada. She's been voted one of the most powerful women in Canada. Today we discuss how her business is disrupting the global fundraising market.
So when they wanted to raise money to build a new stadium, we set up their online store. ESPN picked up this story, and within a couple of months, they had raised $65 million from the fans.
We discuss her goals and her impact.
To not allow people to invest in a good deal because they don't have enough assets or make enough money is not okay.
And most importantly, we discuss family.
I think my early experiences helping my dad build that business were very formative. I was out there in the field planting the grapes in the hot sun, and
All right, let's jump into it. Well, welcome. Thank you so much for coming.
Thanks for having me, Luke. Pleasure to be here.
Absolutely. So I always start off with a few questions. Who are you? Where are you based? And what do you do?
I am Rebecca Kacaba, CEO and co-founder of DealMaker. I'm based in Toronto, although I'm on the road a lot. And what do I do is, what the job of a CEO in a startup company that you built is anything from mopping the floors to doing high-level strategy with our customers. What DealMaker does in a nutshell is we help folks raise capital for their businesses digitally so they can put out Facebook ads, TikTok ads, everything about raising money for their business and close capital that way.
Oh, very cool. And so how long have you been running this business for?
I did the seed round in 2018, so about 6.5 years. I was a capital markets attorney before that for over a decade, and my co-founder was as well. So we saw a pain point in the market where I was working with a lot of startups and a lot of founders, and I saw they were really struggling with the capital raising process, and I wanted to build them a better way to do this. So it was really an idea born out of seeing some changes in the legislation that were going to allow everyday Americans and Canadians to invest the same way they can in Europe and other parts of the world, and have been able to, by the way, in those parts of the world for a very long time. And so we really saw an opportunity in North America where the legislation was changing, and we also saw that people were having a problem in this capital raising process. It was so long and cumbersome, and we knew how hard it was to be a founder. I was working with these entrepreneurs every day. It's the hardest job in the world. You get no credit for it.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so we wanted to help them.
And so, the business was founded in what year?
We started working on it in 2015.
2015, okay.
And then eventually did a seed round in 2018.
2018, okay. So you've been full-time now for 6 years in the business?
That's right.
Very cool. And so what would be some notable transactions that DealMaker has worked on?
Well, the one that everybody loves is the Green Bay Packers. So a lot of people don't know that they're the only fan-owned team in the NFL. So when they wanted to raise money to build a new stadium, we set up their online store. ESPN picked up this story, and within a couple of months, they had raised $65 million from the fans in small tickets, every single person participating. We actually helped them extend that offering into Canada as well and go North America wide because they had such a large fan base.
Wow, that's crazy. And what other types of transactions do you typically deal with in DealMaker?
We do any kind of business that has a great idea. Think of it as anything that can resonate well in a TikTok ad. So things that are in the zeitgeist, AI is very hot right now. Tech and robotics companies do really well. People like real estate a lot, things they can tangibly see and feel, but also consumer-facing brands, we have a really fun carbless pasta company. We've got Death & Co., a chain of bars in New York, expanding across America. So different things that people really want to be involved in. Entrepreneurs can help build a community around their business and get their products to market faster, get contracts faster, or just enhance their brand value.
Oh, wow. And so I have to ask the question, have you used your own service to raise money yet?
Every time.
Yeah?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, that's very cool.
Yeah.
And so when you started off, what was the first type of customer you attracted to the business?
So when we started, we got a lot of the business from my network, lawyers and bankers who knew what we were doing. Over time, that's one of the things we've been really focused on as we move into digital raising, is becoming really focused on what types of business we can help, and those ones that will really resonate digitally. For us, that's been, a long progression as you're breaking new ground in a new area. The capital markets have been very stagnant for a long time. There isn't a lot of change that happens. So we're really breaking new ground in this and continuing to hone the data around what works digitally raising and continuing to feed that back to our customers.
Very cool. Yeah, you really are pioneers with, bringing almost a more democratized version of fundraising to the market. So I can imagine how appreciative entrepreneurs are to have access to your service. It must be huge for them.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of different business models that aren't right for the typical types of fundraising that you think of, whether it's from VCs or from broker dealers. They might just have a different revenue model or have a different business plan, or the TAM doesn't look a certain way on paper. That doesn't mean it's not a great business. If you think about it, if people want to invest a few $1,000s into a business, that means it's going to get really good market traction because there are people out there that love what you're doing. And that's really what Congress intended when they passed the legislation. They really wanted to give entrepreneurs more access to capital, and they could do that by going out and building business communities around their business.
And I apologize for my ignorance to this, but what legislation are you talking about specifically that got passed?
It's called the Jobs Act. So it came out about 10 years ago. And it's really starting to ramp up as we bring the power of digital to the space.
And, not to ask something too grandiose, but what impact do you hope DealMaker has in the long term on the world of fundraising or just on the economy in general?
Yeah, well, democratizing access to capital is really gratifying for me and the team, right? Like, if you look at the statistics of the types of entrepreneurs that are getting funded by this method of capital raising, it's over 30% women and minority founders versus in traditional methods, that's less than 2%.
That's crazy.
It's
wow.
crazy.
That's wonderful.
It's a totally different, democratized type of entrepreneur that can get funded, but also we're giving access to pre-IPO investments to everyday Americans. And that's really what Congress saw as a problem, right? Retail only got into a company once it went public, but all the gains had already been made. With this, it allows anybody, regardless of their net worth, to invest in early stage company and really make those gains. Like, imagine if everyday people could have invested in the early rounds of Uber. How game-changing that would be, the amount of people that could have bought new houses with that wealth that would have been created. And that's really gratifying for us, not only to see that we're giving new people access to the capital markets, but also new businesses that 5 to 10 years from now are going to have a huge impact. And those businesses otherwise couldn't have been funded.
For sure. Yeah, no, that's an interesting point. I have actually seen a graph at one point. It was showing how much value is typically created pre-IPO and then how much is created post. And there are some examples, like I think Amazon was one of the few that it went IPO really early, was stagnant for a while, and then ultimately did create obviously a ton of value.
Yeah.
But many of the other tech giants, a ton of their value was created pre-IPO in that private market, which usually is not accessible to the average person.
Exactly.
Yeah, no, that's very cool. And so you've talked about regulation. I mean, it's got to be a very difficult industry to operate in. You are on the frontier of this industry. What are some of the challenges you're dealing with, day to day right now in your business?
I like to look at it not so much as challenges, just things we have to do to move the ball forward. Definitely, we've got a good handle on the regulations and operating in a regulated space. So I think that's been good. For us, it's really about scaling and growing and creating awareness for the campaigns so that this really becomes mainstream. We want this to become a well-known way of raising capital so that 5 years from now, every entrepreneur knows they can go raise from a VC, they can raise from a broker-dealer, but they can also raise from a community, and every business has a community. So for me, it's about thinking bigger about how to create that awareness for the industry and for us to scale up the business and make sure we can support everybody that comes.
Absolutely. And you have a unique perspective being, having the background of a lawyer and also being a tech CEO. And one of the questions I love AI, and I'm very involved in it myself. There's a lot of speculation about the impact of AI on the legal industry. Not to throw in a bit of a curveball, but how is, the impact of AI coming into your world, or is it at all yet? And, sort of where do you see it going there?
Oh, for sure. We are really excited about generative AI and the leverage it's going to give us and the ability for it to pull together all the elements of what we do and make our platform even better, even stronger. So especially with respect to the data that we're generating, there's going to be incredible things that we can do to grow our industry and our category going forward. In terms of AI in the legal profession, I think there's definitely a place for it too, but it's interesting if you look at the major technologies of the world and the time between when they get brought forward and then when they get adopted, it's always been a little bit different. So if you look at the innovation of the computer, it was a long time later before everybody had a computer on their desktop and started to generate productivity in the GDP with those computers. It was the same thing with the internet. It was around for a long time before Amazon came along and made same-day delivery the norm. And so when you look at it historically from that perspective, I think it's interesting for us to think about generative AI as here. And of course, there are folks like us who are going to be early adopters and really trying to break new ground with it. How long is it going to take for generative AI to become adopted in different places in the economy and start to generate that productivity? That's what remains to be seen. And there'll be winners and losers there, in my perspective, and the winners will be the people who adopt the quickest. If you read, there was a book called The Death of the Professions that came out quite a while ago. That was one of the things that I read that I found really interesting. God, it had to be like 10 years ago or 8 years ago. And a lot of the things that doctors and lawyers do are holding vast amounts of data in their head and then helping people understand it and distilling it down and creating a recommendation from it. And a lot of what generative AI does is taking data sets and being able to generate those options. So I think there's a huge place for it in the professions. It's just a question of when and how it will get adopted by the people who hold the keys to the economies of those professions.
Great answer. And no, I think you're bang on. The ability for a lawyer to have all the data of every legal case in a specific niche and then be able to create a prediction from that or provide those options, as you put it, is almost impossible to imagine. Whereas AI can be that extra tool for a lawyer to, hopefully optimize further. I guess, what I see as well is the fear when I talk to people about using Gen AI is really around hallucinations. And I would imagine in a legal industry, there's probably a lot of, because of the regulation, there's a lot of hesitancy around how reliable are the outcomes of that Gen AI.
Yeah.
Is that something you're seeing at all be answered yet? Or are we still in the very early stages of how do people get comfort around, I guess the predictability of Gen AI?
I think they can if they used a closed database and then put an algorithm on top of that. I think where it can go a little wonky is when it's crawling the internet for answers and it doesn't really know what's the truth and what's not. So that will be the key to value creation in those spaces, is making sure of the quality of the inputs and then helping people interpret the outputs. And that's historically what you see when new technologies develop, right? You see things like the roles of librarians going away because people can find things a lot easier today on the internet than they used to have to go into these big rooms with books and need someone to help them find stuff. So that job goes away, but then new jobs get created in terms of internet influencers who are helping people really understand what's out there in the world and provide recommendations effectively. That's what they're doing. So with generative AI, I think distilling inputs, prompt training, and then helping people interpret the results is really the way we're going to see the job categories go.
Another question about some of the challenges or some of the hurdles you're overcoming to deliver such an awesome service is, how do you deal with just the evolution of fundraising? So, if you're in the VC industry, at one point maybe you're getting pref shares, and now it seems like safes are sort of commonplace that, started in the US in Y Combinator. How do you stay on top of all of those emerging trends and I guess all the, customizations or all the different machinations of fundraising tools that are out there?
That's a great question. For us, we kept the system very flexible, so it allows people to raise any security type, any exemption type into different geographies. So a lot of that legal complexity is based into options on the system. And then where the challenge is for us is to really recommend to people the best practices that we're seeing across the system to date. So it's about giving people flexibility, but then not too much complexity so that it's overwhelming and they don't know what option to pick, because ultimately there are best options for them.
Sure.
And a lot of them will work with a lawyer or capital markets advisor to make sure that they know what's best for their business, because ultimately what is best for people is different depending on their business.
Sure. No, that's excellent. I mean, I've gone through fundraising and I've invested in businesses, and it is, if you're not familiar with it, fraught with, I don't want to say landmines, but just so much unknown out there. So to have a way that you're streamlining it and providing those options, but also allowing that configurability, I could see how that would be so valuable.
Yeah.
Sure.
And it's different in digital capital because the founder can set their own terms and go to market, right? It's different than being handed a term sheet from a VC and then just kind of marking it up and sending it back. The founders and the entrepreneurs really have a lot of control, and they like that. And that comes with its own challenges as well.
Mm-hmm. Very, very cool. And then how about on the flip side? I've been asking about challenges, but what about the opportunities? Like, what do you see on the horizon that's really going to be disruptive to this space that you guys are focusing on?
The longer we're at it, the more data that gets generated, and data is really what powers these kind of capital raising. So to me, as the industry now gains sophistication, that's where a huge amount of the power is going to come from.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. One of the things that I'm familiar with, like those old crowdfunding sites like Indiegogo and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there used to be, one of the big advantages is that there was a community of people that just were looking for opportunities on that. I assume you must be creating a community on your own, DealMaker community, so to speak, as well.
What we found historically over the time as the industry generated, right? That portal model does work really well for raising a certain amount of capital. And then what a lot of people do is after they've leveraged that, they want to build their own community. And what we've seen is that the community who really loves a business and gets behind a business is slightly different for every business. And so what we're allowing people to do is generate a community for their specific business.
Oh, smart.
So they can use lookalike audiences and all of the embedded tools that our platform has around building those audiences to leverage the power of what they've accomplished and take it to the next level.
Oh, that's really cool. And then those people are bought in, maybe at a seed stage, and then they come back for a Series A or whatever else along the way.
Exactly.
Oh, that's very cool. And so what does the outreach look like to build those communities? What are the tools used to find the people that want to invest in your business?
Yeah, it's a complex formula, and it's a data set that we've aggregated since the beginning of the industry, really. So understanding where those communities live online, how to reach out to them, how to speak to them, all allows our customers to build those communities.
Oh, wow. That must be very, very valuable as far as your special sauce goes, I'm sure.
Yeah.
And so you mentioned you were a lawyer before. And what kind of lawyer were you?
Capital markets.
Capital markets. Okay. So obviously that fits with this. How did that dovetail into this? You mentioned briefly at the start, you saw an opportunity. were you trying to raise money and you just found it was, or not personally raise money, but helping customers raise money, and you found it prohibitive, or what was the sort of path that led you to decide to start DealMaker?
It was really that I saw my clients at the time being very unhappy with the amount of fees that it cost to raise capital, right? And I saw how difficult the process of capital raising was. I had so much respect for my clients because they were out there trying to raise money for their businesses so they could get back to building the business. And it really bothered me that after all the work they did to build this business, put together a business plan, get investors interested, the process and the back and forth after they had an investor interested between generating the interest and closing was so long and cumbersome that it really wasn't adding any value. And so that was the piece of the process that I said, I can fix this. And as a result, people are going to be able to raise more money because the whole thing's going to be much more streamlined. And that's really what led me on the journey, is seeing that problem and then also seeing the legislation that was going to allow every type of person to invest. Because previously, really most deals are open to accredited investors only. And what that means is high net worth. And if you think about it, to not allow people to invest in a good deal because they don't have enough assets or make enough money is not okay.
Yeah,
And
very prohibitive.
very prohibitive. And in today's climate, I think if a lot of people realize this, they would not be happy about that, right? Because you're really blocking people out of making the biggest gains in investment just because they don't have enough assets. And so with the legislation that changed that, I really wanted to see that become mainstream and that get some adoption, because that's a very cool fundamental change for North America to make.
Absolutely. And my perception of why there are those, or at least one of the justifications for those rules, is people want to have a certain amount of investment per investor. Like, they don't want to deal with 1,000 investors. They want a few, larger investors. Is it fair to say you're helping sort of aggregate, smaller investors together, and that's what's allowing them to get to the table? Or, what do you think you're doing as far as value add that's suddenly changing people's mind to, remove some of those, the prohibitive nature of the industry?
When you have to close every investor in a cumbersome and costly way, taking smaller investments is prohibitive, right? Because the cost of closing them and maintaining them on the cap table isn't really worth it. So when you streamline all of that with technology and people can now pay on their credit card in less than a minute, suddenly the economics have changed. And then if we've now figured out ways to create economic value from those smaller checks, now the whole model has been flipped on its head. So it's really a lot of the barriers people traditionally would have saw with it would have been, well, I can't have conversations with 1,000 people. It's just too much. If we have a communication portal and basically a private social media feed to facilitate that communication, that becomes very easy, and that becomes brand enhancing. And so it's really leveraging the power of digital and social media in a new and exciting way that's allowing this to become value accretive.
Oh, wow. That's super, super interesting. And yeah, you can totally see the value of it. So back to your own journey. It's an unfair stereotype, but I imagine lawyers are often people who, you're very precise and exact. I don't know if I could ever have gone through law school with all the memorization and everything that's required. So going from the world of being a lawyer to the world of being an entrepreneur, which, I associate with sort of chaos a lot of the time, and you got to have a love for that chaos.
Yeah.
What can you tell me about your transition, and how have you found it going from one world to another?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think when you're practicing capital markets, there actually, in doing big deals, does tend to be a lot of chaos, particularly when you're the corporate one at the center of it all and you're trying to bring in, the real estate specialists and the tax specialist, and you're really trying to aggregate a huge amount of detailed information into one place and then distill it for a customer and get a deal over the line. I always loved that chaos. That was a lot of fun to me. So it's probably a little more similar than people think. But I think I definitely had to morph and transition over the last 6 years. And I think that's part of running a growth company. I'll have to continue to transition. And the person I am today is not the person I'm going to be 3 years from now in order to continue to have the company grow. If you look at some of the big tech CEOs over history that have done that, you can see that morph and that change from when you start on day one and you're coding the product yourself to leading a massive workforce and having to inspire them. So to me, it's about constant evolution and lifelong learning so that I can continue to be what is needed from me by the business.
That's, again, very eloquent way to explain what I'm sure was, a ton of hard work adjusting to that new reality. So I guess the other question I would have is, you come from a family, I understand your dad was a lawyer as well. I don't know if he still is or not. And you also have a family business.
Yes.
Did that have an influence on you, where you have, other family members that have been both in the legal and entrepreneurial world?
Definitely. I think so. It was funny. We did some customer interviews the other day in profiling. And I didn't realize, but a lot of our customers who are entrepreneurs were the same as me in that they had an entrepreneurial parent, typically a father, that they were kind of mirroring that behavior. So definitely growing up with that, I think gives you a good appetite for risk. And you see the ups and downs of business in real day-to-day life.
For sure. Yeah, no, I think coming from an entrepreneurial family as well, one of the things you sort of learn is that it's very rarely a straight line, and it's all about tenacity and the ability to push through it when times are tough, because there are, many peaks and valleys over time. And when you learn that is just all part of the process, I think that's super valuable versus, sometimes outside looking in, an entrepreneurial journey looks almost just like sort of perfect, when in reality it's fraught with tons and tons of heartache and struggle along the way.
Yeah, like that Roger Federer speech that's going viral right now, right? The amount of work it takes to make it look effortless is incredible. But if at the end of the day you achieve that, then that was what you intended to do.
Absolutely. So what is Kacaba Winery?
That is a labor of love of my father. So he has started many businesses, but that is really the one that's been his focus for a long time now in creating premium wines in a region in Ontario that wasn't previously known for being a winemaking region, but actually has incredible terroir on the same latitude as Bordeaux, and really wanting to create that craft, beautiful, full-bodied reds and build an industry with him.
Yeah, it's a wonderful winery for anybody who hasn't been there. And I was lucky enough, I lived in Burlington for a number of years, so it wasn't that far away from it.
Yeah.
And it's not in the sort of traditional Niagara wine region. It's a bit closer, which is lovely too. And my wife loves the rosé, which isn't it named after you? Maybe?
It is,
yeah,
yes.
That's my wife's favorite one. But so you grew up around that winery, I assume.
Yes.
Did you ever think you were going to join the family business at any point in time, or was that just never an interest for you?
We talked about it a little bit. I think my early experiences helping my dad build that business were very formative. I was out there in the field planting the grapes in the hot sun, and all that isn't the most fun. Definitely, I have a ton of respect for farmers because that is a hard job, man.
Yeah.
And so we talked about it a little bit, but I think ultimately, you're going to be the most successful at what you're passionate about, because then every day is not a job. It's just a passion of what you're doing. And so for my dad, wine is definitely his passion. Mm-hmm. But I really always had a passion for the capital markets. That was the industry that I went into straight out of school, mm-hmm. and where I thought I could have the most impact.
Yeah, no, for sure. I think you're bang on with the passion thing. Is that when I've had, I've done a lot of these interviews, and whenever I talk to a person, whether it's a first generation entrepreneur or somebody who's been in the family business for, they're in the fourth generation, and I ask them sort of what's the main advice you have for people, it's always find out what you love and what you care about, and you will be way better at that thing than anything else you're trying to sort of force yourself into. Yeah. So that resonates with me a great deal. You have your own family. You have two beautiful daughters, I believe.
Yes.
And I guess, first of all, how do you find a balance, being an entrepreneur is one of the hardest things in the world, as you said, and layering on top of that you're an entrepreneur of a growth company, which is, in a frontier industry, is just crazy, mind-blowing. How do you find that balance with parenthood and entrepreneurship?
I think it's a lot about scheduling and making sure you look at the way your time is dispersed and you're spending it on the things that are important to you. So I was very lucky at the law firm that I was at in the early days. They had some mentorship programs for the younger women about how to create balance in their lives. And I learned a lot from the senior women there about that. And it was really about making sure that you outsource the tasks that you're not interested in doing and allowing yourself to spend times on the things that are important. So for me, spending time with my family is really important, and I make sure that I carve it out. And I outsource things like cooking that I'm really not a fan of, and I don't need to spend any time on because that's not creating any value for anyone.
Yeah, no, for sure. That's fair. I do love cooking, and I just on the weekend taught my daughter to make homemade pasta, and she was interested for maybe a minute and then left, and then I was left to do the rest of the meal. So sometimes it's not a big payoff either. So the one last question I'll ask, and I often ask my guests this, is do you hope that your own kids would ever join you in some facet of your business, or do you hope they go in their own path, much like you did with your family business?
It's funny. My daughters are 8 and 9, and one of them said to me the other day when we were playing this game at dinner time, what are you going to do in your future? And she said, I'm going to work with you at DealMaker. And I thought that was so cute, and it was adorable, and I can't pretend that wasn't really gratifying. But I think for them, they've got to find their passion. And if that ends up being working with my husband in his business or working with me in the future, that would be great. But I'm also here to support them in finding their passion.
Yeah, no, that's excellent. And absolutely very gratifying. They must be very proud of their mom for all the incredible things that you do.
I hope so.
Yeah, 100%. Okay, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and I'll make sure I share all the information about your business in the description of this video.
Fantastic. Thanks for having me, Luke. This was fun.
Thank you so much for watching. I'm Luke Hanson McDonald. Please like and subscribe and ring that bell so you're notified when new episodes come out. Thanks.